Never mind, I did get one.
I'm glad you were able to get on, Bob. Sorry.
Oh, you're fine. I finally found one. Last time I couldn't find one that worked, but this one did.
My phone, I forgot to charge it last night, so it was completely dead, and I thought the email went out, but my emails haven't been going out.
Huh. Well, so far we're good because nobody's on.
All right.
But thank you for helping.
Of course. Have a great Saturday.
You too. Bye.
Bye.
Can you hear me? There we go.
Yeah. How are you doing?
How are you, sir?
Not bad. How are you?
Good. And you pronounce it Amir, correct?
Correct. Yep.
All right. We'll wait another minute or two because nobody has joined other than yourself. And oftentimes on Saturday, it is a little bit tardy for people to show up.
Understandably. Is this the second class in this series, or is this the first one? Because I think I saw it also another place in my calendar.
I did one Wednesday that was the same basic thing I'm going to do today.
Oh,
Now, it's not the same as what I maybe did. How long ago are you talking?
just like a few days ago. Yeah. So
Yeah, that's the same. It's basically the same one.
Okay.
So if you saw that, it might be a complete repeat of that. Because I usually
No, I haven't. No, I haven't. Actually, I wanted to join that and I couldn't. And I said, damn.
Oh, you couldn't. I didn't think I saw you. Oh, okay. So what is your background, Amir?
So my background, I'm in by training, I'm an electrical engineer. So this is my kind of second career, if you will. Although I got laid off a few weeks ago, 2 weeks ago. So no, I'm fully a real estate agent. But I'm recent. I started with KW kind of in the beginning of the year, and I haven't done much because of my other career. So kind of just starting to get more involved.
Okay. What part of town do you live in?
Arvada.
Arvada, okay. Yeah.
How about you?
I'm here in Arvada.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I'm basically at 64th in Indiana.
Oh, okay. Yeah, not too far. How long you been to real estate?
31 plus years.
Wow, nice.
Yeah.
Seen
Yeah.
all the ups and downs, huh? You experienced them all.
Been through numerous ones, been through basically 4 different markets. Yeah, where they've kind of bottomed out, but hey, you can do just as well. And this market is certainly not bottoming. It's still a good market. It's,
Oh yeah, I mean, it surprised me. I really expected it to go down, but it doesn't seem so.
I don't think it will for a while, and I don't anticipate it's really gonna go down. I think it'll just soften somewhat. But it's gonna level off, and it has leveled off somewhat. But there are indications still, you know, if a house is priced well, it's in a good area. I don't know if you were on Coffee Talk Monday, but one of our teams that they focus up in Candelas, that they had a listing down in Lakewood that priced at, I think it was $425. They had 80 showings over the weekend and 100 groups through on an open house and 29 offers.
Wow, and how much was it sold?
75,000 over list, so it sold for 500.
Oh, nice. Yeah, I see still some houses are very hot. Yeah, I hope I get to that kind of deal, but amazing.
Yeah,
I mean, like all these layoffs, you would expect the economy to slow down, the assets to come down, you know, the stock market, the real estate. It hasn't been affected for several years now. People who have been like big investors have been saying, oh, assets will come down, they're overpriced, but there's still no sign of it, you know.
the very overpriced homes are not selling as well at all. I mean, last year you could pretty much price a home wherever you wanted it to, and you'd probably still get multiple offers. Not this year. If it's overpriced, it's not going to sell.
Right.
So I'm previewing 4 patio type homes today out in Green Valley Ranch, and 2 of the 4 have been on the market for well over a month, and they just started too high. I think the other 2 are still somewhat overpriced. One of them that I'm looking at started at 620. I previewed it about 3 weeks ago. They reduced it to 599, and now they're at 549. And that's probably about where they need to be, maybe even less, because the house doesn't show great. It's dark. It's got a lot of scratches in the hardwood from the dogs. And I mean, you can even see them in the pictures. It's so bad. And it's only about a 5-year-old home, but yeah, it's not going to be an easy one for them to sell.
Yeah, right. I mean, that's true. Some houses over. There was a client that wanted me to, I mean, kind of wanted me to price his house, and I gave him the real price, and he didn't like it, and probably went with another agent who gave him some nice word. Oh, you can sell it for 550, blah blah. I know what he did, but yeah, he's gonna end up like reducing the price. Some people just think that they can be greedy and get a lot of money for their house, but
there are a lot of agents that will feed into people's egos and tell them what they'll sell their house for, whatever they tell them they want.
And you know, I should have done that with that client, because I think he didn't like it when I told him the real value of his house. I was just like very honest. I had to be like a little bit more political, you know, but it's that
being honest is never going to cause you a problem. It's just being honest is never going to cause you a problem, other than you're going to not get some.
I lost the deal.
Yeah. So, you know what? That's the way you got to be. And unfortunately, some people they just misconvey what they are going to do to help somebody, and it a lot of times ends up coming back and biting them in the butt, because if it doesn't sell, then they go, well, Amir was right, you know, this house is only worth this much, and we should go back to him.
Yeah, let's hope that might happen. So for class today, I mean, I feel bad, like you're just teaching to one person. If you want to cancel it and redo it another time in the week when there are more people, I'm totally okay with that.
No, well, let's just, how much do you know about construction?
Oh, yeah, Margaret is also joining. Just as much as a layman. I mean, a little bit more than a layman, probably, because I did a little bit. I have some rentals and I do little things here and there. So I know very little. I mean,
Okay.
Not more than a layman, maybe a little bit not more than a layman, but not a whole lot.
Well, the purpose I have for this class, this particular episode of this class is to just give you an idea of how a home is built. And I've lost this page again, so I'm gonna have to reload it. It'll take me just a minute, but a lot of times when we go to look homes, buyers will ask you questions, and if you don't know how to kind of answer what type of construction or some, let me turn that down for you, just 1 second. We're going to start with this one, but if you don't understand kind of the basics of how a house is built, I think it can hurt you in that you don't need to know how to build a house, but you do need to know how a foundation is poured, why it's important for a foundation to be poured certain ways, and what to look for when you're out looking at houses, because you need to know, if you see something that looks a little bit odd or some cracks or what it could possibly be. And there are different ways to build a foundation. The traditional way is kind of what this gentleman is going to talk about, but this kind of gives you a little overview of how they're done. I don't know if you're aware of structural basements, but a basement with a structural type floor is one where there's basically a floor built about 18 inches above the ground. And the reason they do that is because the soils could have been active enough with bentonite or clays where the soils move up and down.
Is
And
that the crawling space we have under the house here? Okay.
Yep. And it would be a lot, if you go into maybe a 90s home that has a structural basement, it'll be made with wood. There'll be wood on top if it's an unfinished basement. Or if you stamp on the ground when you're in the basement, you'll hear it that it's hollow. Okay, if it's a traditional one like this gentleman's going to show, it's going to be more or less hard, and it's not going to echo because it's a solid piece of concrete, but the concrete floor can float and move around somewhat. The reason they do the structural floor that's about 18 inches off grade is to give you room for, if the soils move, they don't move the floor. Okay. And we'll talk about over excavating a little bit along with the foundation here, and then go from there. So can you see the what I'm sharing here? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. You hear his voice? Okay.
No, I can't hear it. I mean, if you want to share the link, I can just watch it myself.
Okay, hold it. I know what I got to do here. I got to share the sound. All right. Now we can go. Now you give me a thumbs up if you.
Right, it will last for generations. Get it wrong, and your new home foundation can be an expensive headache for as long as you own the home. So, there are 3 critical components to a home's foundation, and those are the soil beneath that supports the foundation, the waterproofing and drainage that surrounds the whole foundation, and then lastly, the foundation structure itself. Now, because these 3 components are so complicated, we're going to cover them in a 3-part video series. Today I want to share with you the first part of the series, the foundation structural engineering for a new home with a basement. I will share with you some best practices that will help keep your home's foundation free of structural problems and basement water leaks. The foundation is such a critical element of any home. Not only does it support the entire home and its contents, but it also houses everything in the basement. Things like hot water heaters, furnaces, laundry.
Okay, so this is your typical basement look. You've got a hot water heater over here. Furnace is kind of in the center. You've got the beam that runs across probably about the middle of the foundation, where these posts are going to support the upstairs floor. These are your floor joists, which are typically either in older homes 2x10 wood, or modern day now we have what they're called TJIs. That means truss joists. Okay, they're man-made pieces of wood that actually support the floor. Okay, And then this in the middle here, this is a roughed in plumbing for a bathroom. So anytime you're in a basement, you see those stubs, typically that's for roughed in plumbing. If we look further back, you'll see that this black cover back here, that is a sump pit. So when they build a home, they actually drill a hole or have a hole underneath the floor that goes down anywhere from 3.5 feet to, I've seen them as deep as 10 feet. What that does is when they build a house, put in a French drain, and that's a series of pipes clear around the whole exterior or perimeter of the foundation walls. And that gathers water and it's directed to this sump pit. If there's enough water being collected, then what they'll do is they'll put in what is called a sump pump. Okay, and the sump pump is activated kind of like the flushing mechanism on a toilet. When it reaches a certain level, it's going to turn on and push water outside. Okay.
So I have a question. In my
Yeah.
own house here in Arvada, we have one of these swamp pits, but there's
Yeah.
no pump in it, and I never have seen water
That's good.
inside.
That's a
Is
good
it-
thing.
Am I supposed to put a pump there, or is it just because
Well,
the
if-
filters didn't put?
You want to monitor it, especially after heavy snows or a big rainstorm, and just take a look in there. And if you start seeing it get to a point where it's filling up, you may want to be proactive and get a sump pump put in. Now, you have to have electrical at the area. So if you don't have electrical there now, you might just go ahead and get an electrician to put electricity in there. So that if you do end up needing a pump, you don't have to wait for an electrician to come out and put it in.
Interesting, it has electrical thing. Actually, it had a pump. First, I thought it's a sump pump when we moved in, but I found out it's just a moisture pump, not a swamp pump. So all it does is it has a moisture sensor, which is broken now. I have to change that, but it just kind of monitors the moisture in the crawling space and pumps the air out if there is too much moisture there. And
Right.
that also stopped working. Have you seen that? People putting like moisture pump there instead of a swamp pump?
Well, you may have it almost sounds like you have a structural basement floor. Is
We
it
do.
wood?
Yeah,
Is it,
there is-
it's wood?
It is
Okay,
wood.
so you probably have two vents, one on each end of the basement. And one is pulling air in and the other side is sucking air out, and it keeps the moisture level underneath that at a lower humidity, so you don't start gathering up humidity or moisture underneath that flooring.
Okay, so I have to
Okay.
fix that pump, I guess, the moisture pump.
That one is like a humidifier pump, and it's keeping fresh air circulating in that basement floor.
Okay,
How old is your home?
2004. So
Yeah, it's probably, and what subdivision are you in, Amir? Or what area?
I
are
mean,
you in?
you know where is the Apex soccer field, this big structure, and then there's this lake and this huge open field soccer grass.
So you're at 54th and Oak?
I'm on 58.
58th and Oak?
Yes.
In the newer homes, in the DR Horton homes? Probably. 'Cause I used-
It's no, I'm close to these newest structures, but we are kind of a little bit away. So
You're just
almost by the Kipling and 58, almost Kipling and 58, by that
Okay.
soccer field.
you're above the soccer fields?
Yeah.
Okay, so I used to live in the condos directly to the east of you.
Oh, okay.
Okay. Those homes are all, I think the ones you're talking about are DR Horton, but anyway. That's very likely that there is a structural wood floor and that you do have those vents that are supposed to keep the moisture level down so that you don't start growing molds underneath that wood floor. You do have a wood basement floor?
Right.
Yep,
Right.
yeah, you want to get that humidifier fixed or a new one put in and keep that level of moisture down.
Okay.
Okay, because you can start growing mold under that flooring.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Okay. And now what they typically do is back in 2004, they hadn't really come up with the idea, but now a lot of times what they do for structural basement floors is they put in a metal pan that's about 18 inches off grade, and then they pour concrete on it. So it's still suspended, but it's much better because the moisture level, it doesn't really matter because the concrete is sitting on a metal pan. And, you know, they still have a circulation to keep that moisture level down, but it's not as critical as it is with just wood. Okay,
I
so
see.
you want to get that taken care of.
Okay, I will definitely do now.
Free appliances are expensive items that need to stay dry.
Yeah, see, that's the sump pit and pump.
Right.
And that pipe would just go outside the house and dump onto the grass. It'd go,
I see.
you'd want to put it out about 6 feet out, and it just would pump out there. Yeah, the good thing is if you don't have water in there, if you just watch it after, like I said, big snowstorms, big rainstorms, and just see, does it fill up with any water? And if it's not, you're probably not going to have an issue. But I would be proactive in make sure there's electrical next to this so that if you are in need of a pump, you can get one pretty quickly and have it installed.
Okay.
'Cause you-
Yeah, no, we have the electrical and everything. It was just it wasn't there, and I was so surprised. But I'll fix that moisture pump now. I'm so afraid of mold. I'm paranoid about it. So
All right.
Dry. On top of that, many of us will finish the basement at some point in time, so it's imperative that the foundation does its job. So let's take a look at the engineering behind a quality poured concrete and the foundation waterproofing does its job. So let's take a look at the
I'll
all
fast forward a little
system
bit.
here.
So
And
here's your footing that's going to be poured down in the ground, and then they're going to pour a concrete wall. And this basement floor, if it's a regular basement floor, is going to be poured separately from the wall and the footing. So that basement floor can actually move a little bit up and down if the grounds move a little bit. When you have really bad soils, what's called bentonite, then those soils under here can push this floor, and they can make it heave up a foot or more. So that's then why you have a structural floor like what you have. Okay.
and the soil
And,
moves a lot here in
this is a
Arvada.
cross-sectional.
What was that?
I'm saying that the soil moves a lot here in Arvada where we are, especially if you are on kind of a little bit of a slope and things are shifting a lot.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. There's some hot soils up and around there.
Yeah.
Fortunately, it's not as bad as many places, but we have bentonite pretty much everywhere to some extent. But there are areas in Denver metro area that are extremely bad. Even in old Arvada, around the railroad tracks off of Carr Street, so around 65th and Carr, and the railroad tracks come through there. Some of those houses in there have really bad basements because the soils are so bad and the moisture is coming down. So when you're showing homes, if you're on a street and the home you're showing is at the bottom of a steep hill, that's really something I try to stay away from. And I'm very cognizant when I show the house to people that I'm looking in the basement to see if I see any signs of moisture intrusion. Because when you're at the bottom of a steep hill, there's more groundwater coming towards you, right? When you're at the top of that hill, you don't have a worry. But when you're at the bottom, you have a serious potential issue. Okay?
Right.
View. So if you cut the house in half, this is what it would look like. We start with the footing, which in our case for the open book build was 16 inches wide and 8 inches deep. And then the second pour, that's poured first. Then the wall is set up on top of that, the forms, and we pour that. For our case, we went with a 9-foot tall wall because we're going with a finished basement in the future, and we wanted plenty of headroom to make it feel like the traditional, living space. That wall was 8 inches thick, 9 feet tall. And then later on, we come in and pour the basement floor, which actually rests on that little ledge here that's left over, 4 or 5 inches of foundation of footing. And so when anyone quotes you a 9-foot tall basement wall, you have to subtract that 4 inches for the basement floor to get the head height from the top. You're going to be standing on top of this basement floor down there when we're finished. Here you can see we're actually using a pump truck to put concrete between the forms there to go ahead and get those filled in, so then we can level it off.
So what they're pouring there is the footer that goes all around the perimeter of the house. Okay, and then the basement wall is going to be on top of that. And the part of the concrete basement floor will rest on that footing.
I see.
And let it set up, remove the forms, and then build the foundation walls on top of that. So we put 3 strands of rebar, seen in this photo here, in the bottom of these footings to give it support along the full length of the footing. So here's a look at it shooting down through the footing forms and kind of what that looks like before we pour. You can see the rebar, 3 strands along the bottom of the footing. The lengths are tied where the ends of the rebar are. See these ridges in the rebar? That grabs onto the concrete. So if they were smooth, they wouldn't hold on as well. So the concrete's going to go around those rebar, and it's going to really latch onto it with those ridges to really give it strength. These chairs are here. That black chair holds the rebar 2 to 3 inches off the ground, which gives it maximum support. And then you can see these nails right here show where the top of the footing needs to be poured to be level. We want to make sure this footing is level because everything above that builds off of it. So if the footing's level, the foundation wall will be level, and then the framing will be level. So really important there. So here's another cross-sectional view of the footing with the 3 strands of rebar in the bottom. So here's a quick look looking from the outside of the foundation at the foundation wall and footing. Now this is a little bit of an exaggeration, but you can see this void created here on the right side under the footing where there's settlement taking place in the ground beneath the footing. And what happens is if there's no rebar in that footing, it wants to settle there. And this settlement can lead to cracking in the footing and the wall above, and eventually potentially a settlement in those where they actually move down, creating a structural problem for this house. So the 3 strands of rebar in the bottom of the footings are a best practice. And this is probably a good time to say that not every crack in the foundation wall is a structural problem. When you want to be concerned from a structural standpoint is if the crack displaces or moves. And this can be in the form of a vertical displacement, as just mentioned with settlement, or it can be in a horizontal displacement. And remember, any kind of displacement in a wall crack can cause a breach in the waterproofing membrane, which can lead to water leaking into your basement, which we obviously do not want. So now let's take a look at the engineering behind the poured concrete foundation wall. We're placing the concrete between the forms here, and
So here you can see the wall has been poured. They use those forms and they pour the walls around. The reason it looks like kind of like a brick pattern is just that's because the way the forms were made. Not all forms have that pattern to them. But then the next very important part, once they pour the foundation, is how they backfill the dirt back in here. And you'll never see, or you should never see, equipment driving right next to the foundation wall when there's dirt there. They should come in at a 90-degree angle, and so that the pressure as it approaches that foundation is pushing the dirt to the sides, not towards the foundation, because that pressure can make the foundation wall crack. So that's how they backfill. You'll notice when he drives up here, he's going to come in from an angle and dump dirt or gravel. So
everything's done and we're ready to backfill, our excavation contractor starts to fill in around the foundation. And this starts to put a lot of pressure on that wall. You can see.
So they start with typically rock, so that the rock is around the bottom portion. So there's drainage there, and then they'll put dirt on top of that. That way, when water comes in, it settles down and goes through the rock and on down underneath. It doesn't stop at the down level of the footing. So we don't want it to, we want the water to continue on down below.
Here are the arrows indicating the pressure on the outside of the foundation wall, which wants to bow that wall in. So in order to counteract those forces, we put steel rebar in the wall, and these are the vertical rebar every 3 feet along the length of the wall from the footing. We also put horizontal rebar in the wall. It's hard to see here, but they're sticking out, one in the lower third,
Like
middle,
right
and
there.
top of the wall where they're forming up here. So here's a plan view of the foundation wall, looking at it from the outside, the footing and the wall here. And you can see the vertical rebar every 36 inches along the length of the wall, number 6 rebar. And then we've got these horizontal rebar, one at the top third, one in the middle, and one in the bottom third. And that works like kind of like a belt on a pair of pants holding everything together on this wall, so that we really have a solid wall that's going to hold together and counteract those forces from the outside. So one other critical piece to that foundation wall pour is making sure they don't leave any voids in it. So we want it to be one solid mass, so any kind of voids will create a weak spot in the wall. So they're very careful at placing that concrete to make sure that all of the gaps between the forms are full. So another best practice, guys, for foundation.
So you can see once it's done, this is critical, because now the house is going to be built from the top of the foundation up. If this is unlevel in any way, it's going to affect the rest of the house. If it's not pretty much exactly square, nothing can be exact when you're building, but within very close tolerances, this wall has to be very square and corners have to be sharp, and it's very important. This is probably poured here, typical now that newer homes are built with a foundation wall actually to hold up the front porch, because front porches are extremely big sometimes and heavy. And if you don't have this to help support that front porch, it'll start sinking. And that's why sometimes you'll see these great big, front entrance with a bunch of steps and maybe a 10-foot wide stairway up to the front door. And that thing is sinking down and cracking and pulling away from that. That's why it's nice to have, see newer builders, a lot of newer homes by builders have their own foundation wall for the front porch. And
So
not
what
just,
what do you do with the older houses that don't have this foundation and the front porch has started to crack and go down a little bit?
Yeah, I would say over the last 5 years especially, and maybe some builders even more like 10 years, they've used the foundation to pour for porches as well. Or even sometimes you may have a back porch, and instead of just pouring concrete on the grade, they'll have a foundation wall around that to help support the patio. That's typically in better built homes, not just your track home like a Richmond home, or especially like a KB home, which is typically a very poorly built new home.
If the patio has started to, it doesn't have the foundation and it started to, because I have seen it in some places. One house I saw that they had this huge slab of concrete that was kind of their front step, and there was nothing under it. It was
right.
At some point probably it was soil, but it was gone, and now it started to crack. What can you do with that?
Well, you could probably get somebody to come in and pour some caissons, or put caissons down in the ground to help support the weight of the concrete. But once it's done, it's kind of hard to do without spending a lot of money on something. So if concrete is on the ground, it's probably going to move. I mean, Colorado we have shifting soils, and we have expansive soils, and we have contracting soils too. We have soils that shrink up. So it's an issue. That's why a lot of times you'll see builders, they don't put, if it's large, they don't put a patio, they might build a deck, because a deck they can pour the columns or caissons down in the ground, put caissons in there, and then the deck is supported by that concrete down in the ground in different areas, but not as a whole slab. I think that's enough on this one. Let's go to one other one that is construction of the basics of the framing of a house. because the framing is an important part, obviously, once you get a straight foundation. Let's see. It's a pretty good little video. We won't
A house or a
We won't
laptop?
do the whole.
Which one do you think is
20
worth more?
minutes. We'll kind of
Well, definitely not the house because it.
So everyone knows what framing is. It's the assembled lumber that gives support and shape to a house. They look at a partially built house, see that tangle of wood, and say, yeah, that's the framing. But most people's knowledge of framing stops right there. They couldn't name many of the individual components that they're seeing or tell you what those pieces are for. I've always believed that this puts them at a disadvantage in contracting situations. Pretty much every remodel and new build is going to require new framing. And extensive repairs are also going to involve framing as you deal with issues like rot and decay. In these situations, you want to be able to understand what your contractor is telling you, and the first step is understanding terminology. So in this video, I'm going to quickly run you through what all those individual framing members in a house are called. We're going to work our way from the bottom up, going from the foundation to the roof. And along the way, I'll even explain a bit about what these members do. And that's coming up next on The Honest Carpenter Show. Anchor bolts, which prevent the house.
This first one, this is the foundation that's been poured. Then this is what's called a mud sill. And this is always treated lumber that is attached with bolts to the foundation wall so that it basically stops the house from being, or should stop the house from being lifted off the foundation. Of course, if it's in a tornado, hurricane, that's where you have the problems. But that's the basic of this.
From lifting up when strong winds blow. The next layer of framing is typically the joists. Joists create the floor structure of a house.
Now, these joists, remember I said before, it used to be in older homes was 2x10s. Now, most builders use the TJI, which is a truss joist. This is man-made, much stronger, much quieter. So that's why a lot of newer homes, you don't hear creaking floors, or homes built with 2x10s, older homes, are going to have that shifting and moving and creaks and stuff in the home. But these truss joists are a great product. They've been out, probably around 25, 30 years.
They're long pieces of lumber turned on their edge, which are then supported at various points from below. Joists span open space, acting as sort of a bridge across long distances. They give us something to walk on in the form of floors and something to hold weight above our heads in the form of ceilings. Joists used to be just dimensional lumber, like wide, flat pieces of solid wood. But in recent years, engineered lumber has partially replaced them. I-joists are modified I-beams built out of long pieces of strand board.
So that gives you a good idea of their construction. And it's very strong, like I said, and it's very quiet. Plus, you're going to notice in here, they have pre-drilled holes that are filled. And that way, when plumbers or electricians go to do work along the joists, they can just punch out those little holes and it doesn't compromise the structural integrity of the flooring. And they can just run wire or plumbing through there.
And solid lumber caps or flanges. I-joists are cheap, stable, and very versatile. And they often contain pre-cut knockouts that you can run utilities through, like ducts and wiring. This makes later construction phases both easier and cheaper. You still see a lot of dimensional lumber on job sites, especially in outdoor structures like decks. The outermost joist in a floor or deck is often called the rim joist or the band, depending on application. Other joists pair up with it or run into it. Sometimes joists are even supported by another horizontal framing member called girders or beams. Beams tend to be bigger, stronger pieces of lumber that act as a...
So there's your beam that goes across in the basement. And these steel beams support that big beam, which basically transfer all the weight that's going to be above it across the entire structure. Okay, so these metal beams that you'll see in a basement, they typically can't be moved because they're specifically set in certain distances to help support that weight from a structural engineer. But they've run the calculations, and that's where those beams need to be.
Spine for joists to sit on. They're sort of like super joists for other framing members. Sometimes joists even run straight into them and are held on with hardware. Girders and beams are sometimes made of dimensional lumber grouped together. Or more commonly, they're made from LVLs, laminated veneer lumber, a type of engineered plywood that is very strong and comes in really long pieces so that they can bridge longer spans. Now, girders and beams also need something to sit on for support. Sometimes they rest on masonry piers, like in a foundation. Other times, they rest on columns or posts. These words, column, post, are sort of catch-all terms for a vertical support. Sometimes they're made of hollow steel, like this one I installed beneath an overspan girder in a garage. Other times they're made of wood, like the very common porch post. I installed these 6x6s beneath an under-supported deck. And on porches, you'll see wrapped columns holding up the beams that support the roof and ceiling. Sometimes these columns are very decorative, but they're still structural. But altogether, columns and posts transfer loads from a beam or girder down to somewhere lower in the foundation or another support. Alright, so with all that structure in place, we can move up from the lowest parts of the house. After the joists have created the floor structure, they get covered with subfloor. Subfloor is sheets of plywood or strand board with tongue and groove edges. Pieces sort of interlock to create a stable surface on top of the joists, and this covers the full perimeter of the floor plan, right out to the edge of the structure. Everything above this point sits on the subfloor, and that includes the walls themselves. As everyone knows, framed walls are built with studs. This word is, of course, an endless source of amusement. But stud is really just a blanket term for pieces of lumber stood up on their ends to create the vertical structure of our homes. They're most often in the 2x4 or 2x6 dimension.
So nowadays, a lot of builders, all the exterior walls, they're doing a framing in a 2x6, which makes it not only stronger, but it gives you a little extra space for insulation. So it helps make the home more adaptable to cold or heat and to keep your costs down. If you're building in a very windy area, you definitely would like to see homes built with 2x6, like the homes in Candelas and out that way. I think most builders, although I don't like to sell homes, and I don't sell homes out there because I think that Rocky Flats is much more of a danger than people want to believe. But anyway, that's my feeling. But the homes out there, I believe, are all 2x6 construction because they need it for that wind. And there's some big homes out there, and you get an 80-mile-an-hour wind pushing against it. It's a lot of force.
That means smaller
Individually, spaced out either 16 or 24 inches.
I can't hear you. What'd you say?
I'm saying that means a smaller space too, a smaller living space too, right? A little bit smaller.
Yep.
Center to center, or they can be fastened together in groups known as stud packs. These packs sort of act as makeshift columns in our walls. They carry heavy point loads from somewhere above and transfer that weight down to a safe point below. But studs never actually touch the subfloor. Instead, they sit on another horizontal piece of wood known as a plate. A plate is basically just a stud laid down on its back. It's virtually identical to a mud sill, except that it's not treated because it's not in contact with wet masonry. This is just kiln-dried 2x4 or 2x6.
So that plate is sitting on top of the floor joist, and then they're going to build up from there. The reason they put this metal in here is to help, so when they put sheetrock up or whatever, they maybe don't nail into a piece of plumbing or whatever, okay? That you'll oftentimes see that metal there to help protect that from happening.
So you have a bottom plate beneath the wall, and you have top plates at the top of the wall. Top plates are typically doubled up for strength. We call them double plates. Adding top and bottom plates to vertical studs lets us build our walls laying down and then stand them up into place. It turns the whole wall into a rigid unit that acts as one piece. Studs and plates are virtually continuous in a wall, except where they're interrupted by doors and windows.
So when you have a window, like here, there's an open space there, so they have to put what they call headers up in doorways or windows to support that weight that's dispersing and being sent out to these side studs out here, because you have that open. So above every door and every window, you're going to find these headers.
Plates are virtually continuous in a wall, except where they're interrupted by doors and windows. These openings get special framing, and that framing has a complex system of names and functions. For instance, you've probably seen these pieces of solid wood facing outward above an opening. These pieces are called headers, and they're very important. Doors and windows create hollow space in a wall, which means that studs aren't there to support weight from above. So the headers transfer the weight that would be in that space out to the edges of the opening. Really, they act the same way that a beam or girder does to carry weight over a span. They're like a bridge that creates a safe, hollow space for the door or window to sit inside. Sometimes headers are also made up of LVLs over longer spans.
So see, these are garage doors here. That's for a 3-car garage, and all of this has to hold the weight of the floor that's going to go up above even this one, because there's another level or two going to be built above. So that's what those headers are there for, and then that weight gets transferred down into the foundation wall.
Like garage doors where they need to bear more weight. The ends of the header sit on pieces called trimmer studs or jack studs. Then they're enclosed by taller pieces called king studs, which extend all the way up to the plate. Empty spaces above a door or below a window are then filled with what are known as cripple studs, just little short pieces that provide support and create nailing surface for drywall and cladding. The bottom horizontal piece in the window opening is called a rough sill, and the entire framed opening of a door or window is known as the rough opening. Again, all this structure bears the weight around these openings so that doors and windows don't have to. There should essentially never be any weight on a door or window. They just sit in a hollow opening and do their job. You'll also see little horizontal sections of wood in framed walls.
This is a real important part of the framing, and a lot of the cheaper builders are very lax in, I think, what they do as far as putting these in. Now, the building department should check this kind of thing on framing, but I think things get missed a lot of times. But these little pieces of wood here, they're not structural, but what they do is help in case there's a fire. It's help to delay the movement of fire going up the wall. And it also helps give support so that the 2x4s or 2x6 studs don't twist as easily because they've got that support.
These pieces are known as blocking, or in some countries, nogging. Blocking serves many different purposes. In tall walls, it prevents studs from bowing or twisting. In some cases, it provides a fire block, which prevents fire from traveling up the stud bay like a flue. This slows the fire down so it can't leap between floors. And in places like bathrooms and kitchens, blocking is installed turned up on its edge. This provides solid wood to mount towel racks, cabinets, and other fixtures to. You really see various types of blocking all throughout a house. That covers much of what you'll see in a single bottom floor. So, moving up, we come to staircases. Stairs used to be built entirely from notched lumber known as stringers. In some cases, especially outdoors, they still are built this way. But many modern interior staircases are built in factories as single enclosed units. These units are ordered beforehand based on accurate measurements and pretty much just get installed like a ramp. The vertical pieces of staircases are called risers, and the horizontal pieces are called treads. They may be attached to frame walls at either side for extra support, or rest on smaller frame knee walls beneath them. Knee walls are just short wall sections, typically under 3 feet. Sometimes they support something, other times they're freestanding. I'll mention here that the word
Now I'm just going to fast forward a little bit and let's get up to the roof, because the roofing is really important. And in Colorado, we have to take into account snow loads because we do have snow. Most houses are built with roof trusses. The rafters are going to kind of discuss here. We don't see as much, except when you get to a very steep pitch, like they're showing on a couple of these. They a lot of times just put up pieces of wood at a very steep end. Trusses are much more intricate and disperse the weight much more evenly, and are manufactured with structural design. They're not just pieces of wood put up. They have a very specific intent of what they do.
It gets sandwiched between rafter peaks. In houses with gables, the ridge board runs all the way out to the exterior wall and sometimes beyond. In houses with contoured roofs, the framing gets more complicated. To create an outside corner, a hip rafter descends from the ridge to the corner of a wall. To create an inside corner, a valley rafter does the same thing. So these roof contours are simply called hips and valleys. Shorter rafters that meet a hip or valley are called jack rafters. The rafters that go all the way to the ridge are called common rafters. On gable roofs with an overhang or an eaves, the suspended rafter hanging out in the open air is called the barge rafter.
Now, the gable rafter or the gable truss has always an end truss, and it's going to have vertical components That's so that you can nail on siding or whatever is going to be on the exterior. Okay.
Down at the lower point, the projecting end of the rafter is called a rafter tail. These are usually tied together with a subfascia. And in houses that will have an enclosed soffit, the little backstrap piece of framing is sometimes called the lookout. Now that's a traditional roof, but many newer homes and smaller commercial buildings aren't necessarily built this way anymore. Instead, they're built with something called roof trusses. A roof truss is an engineered, pre-assembled unit that creates the shape and structure of a roof. In truss roofs, multiple trusses are installed side by side, like rafters, and braced together until the roof sheathing can go on. Trusses are really kind of miraculous. They're made of much skinnier, shorter pieces of lumber, pinned together with spiky metal plates.
So these plates have to be placed on the wood in specific areas, and they're compressed with a big hydraulic press. I used to build roof trusses years ago. And it's pretty amazing that how you put together the wood, the angles and everything, that's all done by an engineer, and how it all forms together to make the structure for the rooftop. And these webbings help disperse the weight. So when you have a snow load, it's pushing not just straight down on the roof, but those webs are pushing the weight away in different areas so that all of that snow load or weight is not just crushing down. And that has to be taken into account too, according if you have just a regular composition shingle, or if you have like a shake roof with concrete or something, because those concrete pieces, a lot of that roofing is 10 or 11 pounds a piece. And that takes in and of itself more structural components to make sure that the roof doesn't collapse on you when you have a snow. So if your client asks you, well, you know what, we would like to have a concrete roof, we're just going to put that on afterwards. Well, you want to mention to them, hey, you're going to need to get an engineer, because they're going to have to redesign the interior of that roof or trusses to help hold all of that extra weight. It's not just something you throw up there.
Altogether, they create sort of a web, and that web is very strong. In fact, it's so strong that most truss roofs don't even need load-bearing walls beneath them. They act like a big girder spanning from one outer wall to another. Trusses are also sometimes used for floor systems. They're very strong, they speed up construction, and they cut down on the amount of large dimensional lumber that we used to need to build houses. So you've got traditional roofs with rafters, or you've got trusses. Kind of two different worlds. But after all this framing is in place, our structure is essentially created. And yet, it's still not stable. Both the walls and the roof will still need to get sheeted or sheathed. Sheathing is a layer of plywood or strand board that covers the entire framing system from the outside like a skin. It's the layer beneath the house wrap and the siding. Sheathing is very important, and it often does more than just close the house in. It also prevents the house from falling over. But that's a topic for another time.
That's an important aspect of sheathing. You don't want your house going toppling over. So that just gives you kind of a basis of the foundation, and then also the framing and where it goes from there. And hopefully that will help you when you're looking at houses, showing houses, just have a little bit of an idea of what you're looking at. And because if people ask you, well, why does this look this way? You can maybe explain to them what the problem, what the components are of some framing, especially in an unfinished basement. They're probably not going to see it anywhere else. But when you get to the basement, it's good to understand what floor joists are and the mud sill and the flooring and all of that. When you're in older houses, again, it is going to be typically 2x10s tilted on its side, whereas the newer homes like what you have is probably a TJI for your joists. Okay. And that's basically all I have for this one. Okay. And, you know, if you ever want to go preview a few homes, give me a call. I'll be glad to go try to look at some homes with you and just, you know, look at a home from everything from drainage, how it looks on the outside, to what looks like that might be a good roof, maybe poor roofing. When you're driving around, you can just look at a lot of roofing, especially when you get into the older areas of town. And a lot of times you'll see roofing that's just in bad condition and needs replaced. And that's a whole nother gamut of stories there, and why I do what I do when I list homes. So I hope that helps you out, Emil.
Yeah, it was very helpful. Thanks a lot.
You betcha. Have a good weekend.
You too. Take care. Bye
Thank
now.
you. Bye-bye. Scott.